party people. Super excited to be here today because I am joined by none other than Alex Lee, aka the Tech Rally. Yeah, front-end engineer at Amazon who took a non-traditional route into coding via a bootcamp, no less. And now Tech Rally's passion is helping aspiring developers to make their way into the tech industry. We have crossed paths before on a few, actually, Twitter spaces, and always had amazing advice from Alex. So looking forward to hearing all about this. And Alex has recently launched a course about how to build a beautiful portfolio without taking up a ton of your time and energy. And that is what we're going to be focusing on today, along with maybe some other points such as interview prep and anything else you want to ask. So drop your questions into that chat. So yes, big welcome to you, Tech Rally. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Leanne. Really excited to be here.
Yeah, as are a lot of other people in this chat. Woo, there's one here.
Yeah, looks like
I'm excited too. Super cool. Yeah. As I said, we're going to be talking about portfolios and interviews and generally breaking into tech. So if you've got some questions, put them into that chat and we'll do our best to answer them. Would you like to start, Tech Rally, with a bit about your background, how you got into tech and what it is you do now to help people do the same thing?
Yeah, so I got into tech by attending a coding bootcamp school. But before even attending a coding bootcamp school, I did a bit of little self-learning through YouTube videos. And this was back in 2015, where I really didn't enjoy my job. I was working almost 8 to 12, 13 hours a day and was on call pretty much every day. And I only had about 1-2 hours of just coding time per day to just really get my feet wet and try to see if this is something I wanted to do as a career. And actually, at that time, there weren't many resources. So the new Boston on YouTube was just kind of the go-to place to learn how to code. And that's where I learned a little bit of Java and Android programming. And I used learning very loosely, and it was just more or less copying and pasting, but just kind of seeing the output and the result of just moving like a green ball from like left to right and right to left was just so mind-blowing to me. And it was just crazy to see what a little bit of code can do. And I really wanted to make this hobby into a career. So in 2015, I attended a coding bootcamp in New York City. I did that for about 3 months. I wasn't even sure what kind of coding bootcamp I was kind of joining, but apparently it was like a Ruby and Ruby on Rails. And I was going to be a web developer. And luckily, I was able to find a job after 2 months of attending. So it was about a 3-month boot camp and then 2 months of job searching. And I was able to get a job as a full stack developer at a web developer agency. Did that for about 8 months. And I really enjoyed it because it was, you touch a lot of different things. You learn full stack, you learn front end, you learn back end. But eventually I kind of had like an affinity towards the front end. And I wanted to make that my specialty. So I applied to a startup where I could just work as a front-end developer. And there I really leaned on my React skills, my front end, my JavaScript, CSS, and just got really decent at front end and really was put in a position to kind of succeed in a sense that I was given a lot of great front-end projects. And during that time, I was working there for about 5 years. I started having this like little itch to do something just outside of coding. So I started a YouTube channel because it was kind of on my bucket list to just overcome this fear of showing my face to the world.
Yeah,
that's my YouTube channel. Please don't watch any of the earlier videos because it's a little cringy. But I mean, it was just something on my bucket list, like saying I did it. I'm not afraid anymore. Let's do it and then be gone. But eventually, this channel evolved into something a little bit more, and I started gaining a little bit more confidence. Started talking about my like tech history and my coding history. And then I started realizing, hey, I am providing a lot of value. So it just happened while I was coding during that time at my startup that I had this other desire and passion to like help other people break into tech, especially because I know how hard it was for me as well. And kind of like aligning those two together, like while I was doing that, I was kind of getting a little complacent at my startup. So I was looking to just kind of level up as well. And that's when I started looking for other opportunities, found my job at Amazon, applied. Actually, I didn't apply. They reached out to me, went through the whole interview process. And luckily, I was able to get a job as a front-end engineer. And it's just been a really great experience for me personally because I've just been learning so much. But at the same time, I still have this separate passion as well to helping developers break into tech. So a lot of times I try to create content with very actionable goals. So even with this like portfolio course, it wasn't necessarily to be like, hey, I want to be a course creator. I just want to help provide information and value to people that are trying to break into tech with actual practical things that they can use to break into this space. So kind of just running it back down, like I am a software developer first, and I just want to help developers break into tech. And at this, like eventually I just want to get to a point where it's like, hey, look at me, like I'm not trying to be this crazy influencer or anything like that. I'm just a software developer. And I say just, but I am a software developer, and I'm just trying to share what I've been learning. And I'm only a couple years ahead, but hopefully the people that are kind of coming up that are new can kind of see my story and then just kind of practice what I've learned, and then eventually we'll all get there together.
Yeah, sounds absolutely perfect. And the portfolio course you mentioned is this one here. Can you tell us a bit about what it aims to teach, and the approach it's kind of taken? Because
it's a very different approach in a sense. Like a lot of courses I noticed, they were kind of like, let's build a portfolio from scratch and we'll kind of get you there kind of thing. And I think those courses are great as well. But I'm very about like, what are some easy steps that I can take to get to landing that first job in tech, right? Because there's just so much information to learn. And it's all about the priority ladder. And it's like, where do I want to prioritize building a portfolio versus focusing on my project versus interview preparation versus I could just go on and on. There's just so many ways to think about how to get that first job as a software developer. And in my opinion, I feel like the portfolio is one of the most essential things you need, but it shouldn't be the most stressful thing you should be worried about. And a lot of times people think about portfolio as in like, I need to learn React, I need to learn some backend systems, I need to create some kind of blog functionality for my portfolio website. Like all of those things are great, but sometimes there's a concept of like analysis paralysis where all you think about is your portfolio and you don't really get anything done with it, right? So essentially what I wanted to do was create a course where, hey, all you need is HTML, CSS, and a little bit of JavaScript. And you could just build this starter portfolio for yourself. And now that you've kind of, even if you don't have projects, at least you have something that you can refer back to that once you do build a project, just shove it in there, right? Shove all your projects in there. And then when you reach out to a recruiter or when you reach out to a hiring manager, all you have to do is just send them your portfolio site and say, look, there are my projects. And this is where I put my heavy focus on. So it was really leaning towards people that were just really struggling to start their portfolios. Like it's not necessarily the most perfect portfolio or anything like that. But what my intention behind this was to really just give confidence to software developers to say like, it's not that hard to deploy. It's not that hard to make a portfolio. Like as long as you know some basics and fundamentals, it should be pretty straightforward. And that's kind of like what I allude to actually in the beginning of my courses. We deploy pretty much on like the second or third video, and I do that intentionally.
Nice. That is great because I think, as you said, a lot of people think they need to know a lot of stuff to make the portfolio. So that brings me to my first question, which is, when should people start thinking about making their portfolio?
Right. And this is a great question. And in some sense, it doesn't even have to be a finished portfolio. you can just have your portfolio in stealth mode or incognito mode in a sense if you don't have the projects to show for it. So in my opinion, if you have a decent grasp of HTML, CSS, and at least just a little bit of JavaScript, then you should be able to use my course and then just build a portfolio relatively easily. Because we're if you ask me to build a portfolio from scratch, and maybe we can kind of allude to this later, but the whole concept of like design and color schemes and all of those things, it's very, very difficult. And even if you ask me about it, I'm not the expert, but there are a lot of great people that have already done the hard work for you, and they've already made the HTML templates for you. All you're doing is identifying where those like default values are, and then just replacing it with your content. So in your case, like you would replace like John Smith with like Leanne, and then you just keep moving forward and forward, like replace their projects with your projects. But it's not really like rocket science in a sense, but you still need to understand like how HTML and CSS works to be able to actually make those developer decisions to do it. Yeah. So I would say start early as possible if you have the skills.
That sounds perfect. So Lotta here says that they are trying to design their portfolio and they're a junior dev. So from what you're saying, really, you can move away from the design side of things and just get someone else to do it for you, which sounds amazing.
Yeah, 100%. And there's nothing wrong with I know some people have said, oh, are you cheating or are you not really showing your actual skills? And if you have the time to do it, definitely consider it. But you have to be very, very confident in your design skills, because when hiring managers or recruiters look at the portfolio, they're giving it like 10 seconds. And just to give an example, like if you go on the Scrimba site, it's beautiful. Like it's very colorful. It has great color schemes. It has like a lot of animation, not animation, but like art that really just makes it pop, right? But I assume a designer was involved in some kind of aspect of this to like make it really look good. And if you don't have the resources to really come up with those kinds of aesthetics, then just it's better to reach out and see what is already out there and then kind of do that find and replace, in my opinion.
Yeah. So can you tell us offhand where we can find such designs that we might be able to use?
Yeah, so there's some free resources that are out there. There's like a website called shoot, I need to look for it. But a paid resource could be a website called ThemeForest. ThemeForest is pretty good in my opinion, in the sense that there's some price ranges between like $5 to like $10. And there's some other resources for portfolios that you can use that are free, but you kind of have to keep that watermark there as part of like being able to use it for free. So it's really up to you to see like, hey, is it worth to spend that $5, $10, $15 to buy this theme and then kind of work with it.
Perfect. Yeah. So have a look out for some amazing things. Yeah.
Yeah,
cool.
definitely.
So I suppose the next question is, will a hiring manager know or indeed care that I've used a theme? What's your take on this?
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, yes, they will know if they've seen a lot of the portfolios. But my recommendation, even with the course, is, hey, I gave you like a skeleton layout of what you can follow, but I highly encourage you to customize certain things once you feel very confident about it, right? And even if they do know that you use the theme or they know that they've seen this theme, who cares, right? At the end of the day, what they really care about is like your projects and your skill sets and all of those things. So even if the portfolio may not be as unique as like, like something you built from scratch, it does have a structure that hiring managers and recruiters are used to. I think the secret sauce is really going to come into play when you're able to look at the projects themselves. If the projects are superb and excellent, then that's what they're gonna care about. Then they're gonna dive deep into your GitHub account and all of those things. But the portfolio is just, I always consider it like a museum where it holds art paintings, right? It's just a house or just a location or a hub to kind of house your your actual projects. But outside of that, like you don't need to make it so fancy and like I know some people care deeply about these like animations that like flash in and like spark whenever you like click a button or something. But if anything, that gets really noisy, and sometimes it might not be very pleasing to the eye. Like I noticed, like sometimes it just comes out and it just hurts my eyes to like be on this portfolio. And if anything, I would just want to skip it. But if you're able to just really highlight, hey, these are my projects. Hey, this is who I am. Hey, click on these links. That's all that really matters at the end of the day. So it's that fine balance of like not going too crazy or like trying to do your own thing, or like how do you just kind of guide whoever's reading your portfolio to just your projects themselves.
Perfect. Have a couple of people here. Anime fan is 12 years, too young to be a web dev and do freelancing. And then Jean is asking, can you create a portfolio even though you're in high school? So what do you reckon on that? Is it ever too early to get started with stuff like this?
I don't think so. I mean, if anything, I wish I was 12 years old now and like starting my own starting my own thing too. But it's just crazy to see how smart these younger generation really is, because I can't remember what the heck I did when I was 12 years old. I was probably playing like Game Boy or something and just like playing in the park. So to be able to see like 12-year-olds and like high school like thinking about these kinds of things is really amazing to me. But at the same time, I would also encourage everyone, like if you're that age, to enjoy life as well. Like there's a lot of the work will always be there, especially as I've gotten older. It's just like never ends, right? I've been working for over a decade now, and it's just like, oh great, I have like another 20 years to think about, or 30 years possibly. But to answer that specific question, yeah, you can create a portfolio anytime, right? It's there's so many opportunities there where you could build applications for yourself, or you could build like SaaS products, no matter how old or young you are, because it sounds like there's just this new age and generation where people are able to make passive income or active income by selling their like services, not necessarily just being a freelance developer. So there really is a market out there for like plugins and all of that stuff using like Shopify themes or Shopify apps and all that stuff.
Yeah, lovely. Go for it. Why not?
Why not? Yeah.
And Arbats, do hiring managers care about CVs more or portfolios? Yeah, which is more important, or are they equal?
I think they have a relatively equal balance, but in my eyes, I think portfolio is a little bit more important because that's probably going to be the first thing that a hiring manager will see. And generally, CVs are more integrated when you start like applying to jobs through like the job portals. So the portfolio is really nice in a sense of like if you're reaching out to a recruiter and then you send them your portfolio, or like you can also attach a portfolio as well. But portfolio is a little bit more flexible from that perspective. A CV is always going to be more catered towards the job that you're applying for. And that's why they always recommend like customizing your CV depending on what company it is. That way you could show like interest in that company, saying like, hey, I'm so excited for this company that they raised their Series B. If you really feel like you're going to be able to accomplish so many things like X, Y, Z, and then you could kind of like add that to your CV and like really show genuine interest. But a portfolio is a little bit more like generalist perspective of trying to get as many eyes on it as possible, as well as like kind of that social proof that says you're a software developer. So both have equal importance, but it's just kind of like they play a different role. And I personally, for me, like as an experienced developer, like once you get that experience and once you become like 1 or 2 years in the industry, I really feel like the CV is not as important, because the demand for software engineers or experienced software engineers is so high that people are kind of willing to just forego CVs and even portfolios. They just kind of base everything based on your LinkedIn, saying like, hey, this person has like 2-3 years of experience. Let's try to recruit him. And that's why it's just so important to think about like priorities and like and where you are in your stage as a software developer to like determine like, is this worth doing? Is this not worth doing?
Perfect. Yes. I was wondering, and Victoria is also wondering, the relative importance of GitHub versus your portfolio? Because we have a question sometimes, do I need a portfolio if I've got my GitHub going on? So what do you reckon about that?
Yeah, so in the beginning, if you've asked me, I would have said GitHub is not as important. But the more and more I talk to other software developers in Twitter specifically, and this is what I love about meeting you and like Alex and Scrimba and the whole like rest of the tech Twitter, is like my opinions can change, and it's definitely changed. Where I thought most of your focus should just be on your portfolio and your projects and all that stuff, but there are hiring managers that will look at your GitHub and look very thoroughly at your GitHub. So having a presentable GitHub is going to be super important, especially early in your career. I think the importance, and I kind of alluded to this a little bit before, is like the whole concept of having like a presentable GitHub, presentable portfolio, CV. All of those things are really important in the beginning of your career because you're trying to land that first job in tech. But it slowly becomes less and less important as you gain more experience. Like they don't really check my GitHub as much. They just kind of base it solely on my like LinkedIn and like what I've accomplished, my work experience. And at the end of the day, the only way they validate that is through my technical interviews. So like that's kind of like the game you kind of got to play. But early in your career, it really is important to like have all of your like bases covered, which is going to be the GitHub, which is going to be the portfolio, which is going to be the projects, and just making sure all of them kind of are linked together and they're all like synced up properly.
What exactly do you mean by that? So that would you, for example, have the same kind of about me across the different ones, or how can you make sure it's cohesive?
Yeah, so what I meant by that was like in your portfolio, if you're going to be presenting a project, make sure you link your GitHub to it. And then once you get to your GitHub, make sure your README is very like thorough and clean and very straight to the point of what you're trying to build. Maybe add some like GIFs or videos of your application as well as like a URL. So sometimes people are going to go straight into your GitHub without going through your portfolio. And then you could kind of create that closed loop, right? Like if someone goes straight to your GitHub, maybe just give them direct access to the site on your README. But if someone goes to your portfolio, then you could provide the GitHub and the URL. So like just making sure like those URLs aren't different, or making sure that, you know, like you're cross-linking appropriately and all of that stuff is what I feel is really important there. But you don't need to have like the exact about me or anything like that. It's just more about just syncing up all the links properly. Interesting,
because Parvati was asking, is it necessary for the projects on that portfolio to be deployed?
100%. Not only deploy, but I encourage you to buy a domain. It costs like $5, even for like it doesn't have to be those premium.com domains or anything like that. But the thing is, and I've talked about this in my Twitter spaces with you and like Alex as well, it's just if you're not willing to invest in yourself, then how can you expect like a hiring manager or recruiter to invest in you kind of mindset? And it's not like we're saying you need to go out and spend $5,000 on something like exorbitant, some like weird, like scammy course kind of thing. It's $5 that you're spending on yourself to make sure you have like a professional domain. And if you take my course, you can actually deploy your website for free. So the only thing you're paying for is the domain, right? And if a hiring manager is looking at 20 like engineers, and there's probably going to be way more, like 80 to 100, and your domain says like .heroku app, or you're telling me I need to go into your GitHub while the other 99 people just have like a straight domain and I could just look at it immediately, then I don't know, like who do you think I would ignore first? I guess is the real question, right? Like it's pretty obvious. Like if I have to do extra work, I'm not gonna do it because 99 other people have done the extra work for me. So just think about it from the perspective on the other side. Like yes, would it be inconvenient for you to look at your own portfolio or look at your own projects, right? If that's the case, then maybe you should consider like, hey, let's just deploy it, put it out there, and see what happens.
Yeah, make it easy for them.
Make it easy for them. Yes, exactly.
Brilliant. I want to take a short detour away from the portfolio side of things because you mentioned Tech Rally that you would like to talk a bit about maybe interviews and other aspects of breaking into tech. And we've got some great questions coming in from the chat. So let's start with this one from Francis. When can a junior dev feel more confident to apply for jobs? Is it a must to complete a course or a certain amount of time? Basically, the question is, how do you know when you're ready to apply, I think?
Yeah, I don't think you'll ever feel ready necessarily. You kind of have to do it once you've, I don't know, if you feel like you've been just taking courses after courses after courses, or you built some projects and you're like, okay, what next? Do I need to build another project? Like, I would take a break from doing that and just stop repeating yourself, right? Like, don't like try, right? Don't repeat yourself.
Yeah.
Like eventually you're gonna have to just make that jump and see what sticks and what doesn't, right? And even the people I've worked with like on a one-on-one basis, I tell them to try to do the interviews as fast as possible because I expect you to fail those first initial interviews, but you need to learn how to fail to adapt and succeed, right? Because it's so hard to replicate that interview process unless you're like paying for like mock interview services like that. But I would encourage you to apply earlier than later. And if anything, you'll just get the feedback saying like you are
Yeah.
not skilled enough in X or you are not giving enough of a good story in Y. And that way you can go back, kind of go back to the drawing board and figure out like, okay, maybe I need to learn my JavaScript fundamentals more, or like maybe I need to learn how to code faster when they're asking me to build this like widget app on React, right? So just getting those reps in is going to be super important for the interview process. And a lot of times, you know, some people just say like, "Oh, I'm a really great interviewer," and you could totally tell who the great interviewers are. Is because they're like changing jobs like after like every year or something, and it's
Yeah.
because all they're doing is just like practicing interviews, right? So it really is like a skill that you need to attain. So I'd encourage you to get your feet wet earlier, and then just go through some of the potential failures that might happen, and then eventually you'll just get better and better.
Yeah. It's all good practice, basically. If you see it as
Basically, yeah. Long-winded way of saying it's practice.
yeah, just a chance to train. Look at it like that. Yeah.
Exactly.
Then it's a bit less intimidating, I think, if you look at it that way.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
you might get lucky and then woo. Yeah.
I mean, I failed so many interviews in my life, and it is what it is. Like,
Yeah.
I've definitely learned from a lot of them and, like, what I enjoy about certain interviews and what I don't, and sometimes I even know during the interview, like, 20 minutes in, I'm not gonna get this job. So I'm just like, "Alright, like, let's have fun with it at least."
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And that might turn it around as well. You never know.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. Question from Einstein. Really? How can I
Nice.
sell myself better during an interview? So yeah, how can you make yourself shine?
Yeah. I talk about this a lot as well as don't shoot yourself in the foot. So
Mm,
try not to talk about what you don't know how to do and more focus on what you've done, what you know, and what you've accomplished, right? So many times, like I've talked with people on a one-on-one basis where they're saying like, oh, well, this job description says Python and I don't know Python and I have this interview, like, what should I do? I'm like, don't tell them like you don't know Python. Like, yeah, you don't know Python, but talk about like your Ruby skills and how you can transfer your Ruby skills into Python because there are a lot of similarities in syntax, and then highlight your Ruby on Rails projects that way, right? I see so many people talking about, oh, I can't do this, I can't do that, I can't
mm,
do something in during the interview. And if you're the one interviewing that person, you're like, oh shoot, like there's so many things this person can't do versus like a person that says, I've done this, I've done that. Like it just switches the narrative of this is what I've accomplished versus this is what I'm not capable of doing. And here you're really just trying to stand out compared to all the other I guess junior level candidates here. And like a lot of times the skill sets are pretty similar, but if you're able to kind of narrate that story to highlight who you are and why you should be hired, then that is going to really help you shine. Another thing I would also recommend is to really research the company. Sometimes, like,
mm.
not as much for the experience roles because that one is a little bit trickier, but for the newer roles, like I said, the skill sets are relatively similar, so you got to figure out ways to again stand out. So if you know about the company receiving funding for their Series B or Series C, you could bring that up. Or like, why do you want to work for this company? I want to work for this company because I really have a huge heart for helping education beyond XYZ or whatever, right? Like, I want to work for Scrimba because I want to help aspiring developers break into tech. And this is such a great platform. And I've taken the courses myself. And I'm a perfect example of someone that is able to finally like even land an interview with Scrimba because I took a Scrimba course, right? Like, hearing about all of these things is going to really help the manager or our recruiter really get a sense of like, where does your motivation lie outside of just pure like technicals?
That is very interesting. I have a question here on the topic of experience, and that is, does freelancing count as experience?
100%. That is something that you should definitely put on your resume. If anything, that is the highlight of your resume, because that is showing that you've used your technical skills in a professional setting, and now you just need to put it on your resume and then talk about how you interacted with your clients, what kind of accomplishments did you achieve, like how many pages did you make. This is super, super important, especially if you don't have like quote unquote employment work experience. This is the stuff that you're going to have to put on your resume. So super recommended. If anything, these are better than like personal projects, because personal projects can kind of fall into that category of like, oh, this is just like a side app or whatever. But having actual like freelancing experience is like that stamp of approval that, hey, we made a business transaction and you built something for us, and now I can put it on my resume.
Perfect. So I hope that answers your question. Arbas. Dave says, I want to work with Scrimba because it looks like masses of fun. Indeed, it is. And then Danny Thompson is here, and he says, you heard Tech Rally, everyone apply to Scrimba for jobs. Yes.
Sorry, Leah, maybe I just gave like a shout out blast. Are they even hiring?
Will be full. Amazing. Oh, but this is an interesting question from Andrew. How do you share your freelance experience without giving away clients' privacy? And that, I suppose, can apply to other experience as well. In some projects, you can't talk about what you've done. So how do you get around that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I mean, first of all, I would ask, is it possible to talk about your client information in a sense of like, who did you work with, right? Like, oh, I've worked with a company XYZ to build something, and you could like put it on their resume. But if they say no, you could just say freelance engineer and then just say like company, and then like kind of write the details of what you've done if they're okay with that as well. But you need to give something, right? Like, they need to kind of give you some kind of flexibility to write what you've accomplished in a sense, but maybe just try to incorporate the privacy aspect in that as well. So it's not the best I guess, look for your resume if there is some limitations with that, but try to see if there's a way that you could get some flexibility to like at least talk about what technologies you used, and kind of just highlighting who you are as a software developer. So if you use like Node and Express and like Postgres or something, at least try to plug those technologies that you use to like accomplish that certain task, right? Maybe you might not be able to talk about like, oh, I like work on their like shopping cart, or I worked on their like backend systems to facilitate like transactions in a more seamless way. Like, you could still generalize it, I think, but maybe you can't get into like the specific nitty gritty details.
Yeah, perfect. I guess the point is communicate with your client slash former employer.
Yeah, communicate with your client, and then just see where you can kind of highlight your skill sets. Still is where my like go-to is.
Perfect. I have a question from God's Will, which is why I was kind of typing there, because God's Will is asking, do I need to study DSA for technical interviews? And I was trying to find out what DSA is. So maybe you know, Tech Rally.
Yeah, it's data structures and algorithms.
Right. I knew it would be obvious. Yeah, so,
it's not always obvious. There's too many acronyms in tech, honestly.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So that we get this question quite a lot. What's your take on this?
Oh, I'd be curious. What is your take?
Well, I mean, we usually say, especially for front end, that it might help for sure, but it's not a must because there are jobs that don't ask for it. I think the backend might be different, especially if you're looking for front end. We think you can manage it without it, but on the other hand, it won't hurt. That's what we've usually heard, and that's what we usually say.
Right. Yeah. Like I said it before, it's all about the priority scale, and you kind of have to figure out what job you're applying for and what job you're interviewing at, right? If it's a front end role, are they gonna ask you data structures and algorithms? Maybe, maybe not. Like we don't have this like one blanket answer saying you need to or you don't need to, but there's a way to like best guess what type of questions they're going to ask you based on the job description, right? And if you're wrong, then that's okay. It is what it is. But if you're applying for like a front end role and your JavaScript skill sets aren't quite up to par, then I would more focus on that aspects of it, like the JavaScript, the CSS, the HTML. Like, can I build like a really, really simple modal in 45 minutes or less? Like those are the things that I would prioritize for like front end roles. But can they still ask you DSAs? Yes, possibly. And like, do I agree that that's like a great way to evaluate a front end developer? I don't think so, but we don't know, right? Like every company is like trying to do things differently. If you ask me if I was applying to like a FANG type of company, like do I need to study data structures and algorithms? I would say yes, because their kind of formula is a little bit more established. So like that one, I like even for my front end role, I studied data structures and algorithms, but like maybe it was still more geared towards like the JavaScript side, but at the same time, they could still throw in a DSA like masked in a front end question. So there's just like what I learned here is like just expect the unexpected. But if you had to ask me what's bigger priority, I would say like definitely the JavaScript, the front end aspects of learning of the interview process is super important here.
Awesome. Johnny Thompson reckons it isn't a cool thing to say, but most coding interviews will revolve around DSA. It will only help you to know them. So
yeah, it doesn't hurt, and it's like I said again, it's all about the priority ladder. And if you don't know if you don't have a good understanding of JavaScript and like how to build like very, very simple like applications in like 45 minutes or less, I'm not saying like a to-do list or anything like that. It's more about like a widget, a modal, like a calculator app. Then I would focus on those more if it's like a front end role, because they're going to test you on these like little things here and there like that. But the DSAs are always going to help. You just got to figure out like how much you want to prioritize it while your interview prep is going.
Totally. Yeah. Beautiful. I was wondering, well, I wasn't actually wondering. It was a question from someone else. Andrew said, stop calling yourself a junior. You're a developer. Junior is just an excuse to pay you less. Do you agree with that, Tech Rally?
Yeah, I agree with that. There definitely is. I'm trying really hard to avoid the word like junior and aspiring, and sometimes I do find myself using it. But I'm trying to figure out a better way to kind of like describe a developer that's starting their journey. So I always say like a new developer or a developer just starting. But the reality is like the experience level is going to be pretty different for someone that has 1 or 2 years of experience versus someone that's kind of starting their self-taught journey. And I do agree. It's like, stop calling yourself a junior, because it really does put yourself in a kind of a difficult situation. But you also have to acknowledge like you don't know as much as you think you do when you're a junior as well. So there has to be that fine balance of like acknowledging like, hey, like I'm still pretty green, but if I could find a company that's willing to take a risk on me, and we could even talk about this more about like even pay. But when I started my job in New York City as first time as a developer, I got paid 75,000 in New York City, and that is the equivalent of making like 29,000 in Austin. So like you can already see like I didn't really necessarily like start off with 100K and be like, look at me now, like I'm rich AF or whatever. Like I had to kind of work my way up, but it was okay because I knew my skill sets weren't quite there. But I spent so much time in the first 2 years as a software developer to absorb as much as I can. And that way, when I got to my second job, I was making like 100K plus. But that's the difference between like getting your foot in the door and then increasing your salary that way versus like, hey, like I don't want to get paid less because you call me a junior. It's like sometimes you gotta have to bite the bullet to like get your foot in the door. And I know some people are gonna like contest me with that, but I truly believe getting your first job is so hard to do that there are like a little bit of sacrifices you need to make early on to eventually get to your like the pay that you're like actually wanting to reach for. So a friend of mine always says like the road to 100K, and it's so true. Like it doesn't, if you get 100K off the bat, that's great for you, and like I will always support that. But not everyone, you know, like can do that, in my opinion, myself included.
Yeah, me too. Perfect. Yeah. Interesting question I found going back to the backend front end situation. Asks John, it awkward for someone with a few years of experience as a backend developer to want to pursue a front-end only job? Would the recruiter or interviewer be taken aback by that?
That's a great question. And I don't think there's any issue with it. You just got to be prepared to answer front-end interview questions. It's like me applying for a backend role, and then they're asking me about like microservices and Redis and how do you like optimize your API, XYZ, blah, blah. Like I know these terms and I could like have a general conversation with a lot of backend developers that way, but they're gonna test you on your backend skills. Like if anything, what I would recommend is if you really want to work for that company is to go in with your strengths and then eventually show that, hey, like I actually do have some skill sets in the front end, and then start taking tasks that way. So you establish trust based on your current skill sets. So maybe the first 3 months, 4 months, you're like doing a lot of backend stuff. And then like talk to your manager in between saying like, hey, I would like to do more front end tasks because I've been working with React or JavaScript or Vue or whatever technologies that they're using. And just say like, I would love to take more like front end tickets if possible, even like a front end project if possible. And then that way you could start establishing your like full stackness, or maybe you eventually just kind of go straight full front end if you want to. Like being a software developer, like this whole front end back end thing, like I know why it's there, but at the same time, it doesn't have to be so restricting. It's just very difficult to convince a hiring manager to say like, oh, this guy doesn't do any front end, and like he can't even solve these front end questions during the interview. Why should we hire him as a front end developer, right? So I think that's kind of would be my recommendation.
Lovely. Alex is back and has asked, has Tech Rally played the guitar yet?
Yeah, I have a guitar in the bag, and I haven't played the guitar in a while, but I do need to practice it for. I do have to play in like at a wedding soon, so it's gonna be something I need to prepare for eventually.
Perfect.
Maybe we could jam with Alex in the future.
Let's do it. I have zero musical ability, but I once got demoted in the Christmas play from the triangle to the coconut shells because the triangle was too important.
Oh no!
Yeah,
that's I would love to hear more about that story.
My skills are in other areas. Let's say that. Anime fan is asking, is it possible to learn all JavaScript methods or everything? Wow. And can you ask for help from other senior developers at the company you work in? I think for the first part, I guess it's possible to learn all the JavaScript methods because there's not that many of them. But really, if we're asking, is it possible to learn all of the syntax? I go with no, and it's probably not desirable either. What really matters is your understanding of how it works and the ability to know where to find it out. Is that fair to say, Tech Rally?
Yeah, I agree completely. Like, if you ask me what's the difference between splice and slice right now, I don't know actually. I know what they do, and they're very similar, but I generally Google it because number one, I don't really use those like prototype functions too often, but I'm aware of them. And like generally the stuff that I really use often is like the map for each, reduce a very little bit, and sometimes I use like the includes. Like these are things that I use like often on a day-to-day basis, but there are like a few things here and there that I don't necessarily use. But sometimes during an interview process, having those tool sets would be very useful. So that's why I always say like interview is another skill set where you kind of have to like refresh yourself with all of these other like utility functions that you may not necessarily use on an everyday basis. But yeah, I agree with that. Just I think being aware of it and also trying to learn how to Google when necessary is going to be very useful there. But I don't know all the
Absolutely.
functions.
No, I'm not sure that anyone does, to be honest.
Yeah.
No, yeah, completely agree there. A bit of discussion going on in the chat about internships. Debjit's take on this is, please don't start a free internship if it's full-time, at least. It's not worth it. You really need to be paid for your work.
Mhm.
What's your take on the whole free internship situation?
Yeah, I completely agree. You should not be striving or going for free internships, especially like these full-time internships. But at the same time, if I was in a situation where I was unable to find a job like a year for like 2 years, and for some reason it's just not working, right? And I had the capacity and the means, financial means to like intern for 2 months or 3 months for free. That's when I would start really considering doing it because obviously something isn't working and everyone's case by case situation is going to be different. But for some reason, I don't know, maybe they keep asking that you need work experience, but how am I supposed to get work experience if you're not going to give me an opportunity, right? So sometimes you might need to like make a little bit of sacrifice here and there to get to your eventual goal, right? Like I wouldn't do that internship for like a full year or anything like that. If anything, I would try to use that internship and put it on my LinkedIn, and I wouldn't even like write internship. Maybe I'll just write like software engineer apprentice or something to like basically highlight my skills as a software developer and then leverage that to start like hustling really, really hard while I'm at the internship. But it's not the most like ideal situation to be in. But like making a blanket statement like that is sometimes dangerous in my opinion. Saying like don't ever take a free internship. Like I totally agree. Like you shouldn't in the perfect world. But if you feel like your strategy isn't working and maybe having like a 1 or 2 month thing could be really beneficial because like I've also wasted 2 years trying to look for a job that's willing to pay me, but they're not willing to pay me, right? So outside of that, like it's really is case by case, and like I try not to like give these kind of like blanket statements if possible. But yes, if you can find a job that's willing to pay you, that's probably going to be the best situation you could be in. Yeah.
Lovely. On this topic, Peculiar is asking, is it good to highlight your previous non-tech roles in your CV when applying for a front-end role? What's your take on this, Tech Riley?
Yeah, I would do that 100%, especially if you can kind of provide some numbers. Like if you were like a manager at a specific company, you could talk about like how you improve productivity by 15% by implementing some like ticketing system of some sort, right? So it shows to the employer like, okay, this person is very responsible about like specific tactics and strategies to improve the overall like state of your like team and performance, right? So rather than just saying like manager at this company, like you want to kind of elaborate and emphasize on what results came out of it, right? It's all about the results. So you should really try to figure out how to plug and play to highlight your skills and then like kind of add that in as needed. But try not to just do like simple like I was working at X company as a barista and then that's it, right? Like you want to add some flavor to it to actually highlight who you are and like your skill sets there.
Yeah, absolutely. People often say they don't have any experience and they're starting from zero. You're not really starting from zero. There's nearly always something you can take from any previous
100%.
industry. So
100%.
completely agree with you there. Shashi Alo is here and will be here again not next week.
Yeah, he's
in
2 weeks, right?
That is super exciting. But for now, his question is, what is the best way to gain experience if someone cannot find a job? So we touched on internships. Do we have any other advice?
Yeah, I mean, I think we touched on it before with like the freelancing, reaching out to local businesses. And we actually talked with someone on a space yesterday about how he said he was contemplating going to a coding boot camp or taking some type of course, but he also said that he worked with clients and built their sites for them, like local clients. And I was like, yo, that is work experience. You just need to put it on your resume. So there are definitely different ways to do it if you can't get it through like the traditional means. There's also a great way to do it is networking and reaching out to like hiring managers on Twitter and all of that stuff. There's a lot of great software developers working at great companies that can be a way for you to get in. It's like the back door and the front door mindset. Outside of just having like good conversations with these software developers, I think it's really important to also kind of showcase your like technical skills as well, right? Like there are a lot of great people I met on Twitter that are new to software development, but I haven't seen their actual work. Like they're really good at like having great conversations with, but not necessarily seeing what type of projects they've built, right? So it's not just about networking from like, hey, we're friends, but we also need to see like, hey, like what are you working on? Like share it on Twitter so I could see. So networking is a way, freelancing is a way, internships are a way, hopefully paid internship is a way. And then like even going on Fiverr just for the sake of putting it on your resume could be beneficial. So like I don't it's just like I hate to like always try to like undersell yourself, but if it's a means to an end, I would go for it in my opinion. Like even before I landed my first job in tech, I was also working as like an intern for like $15 an hour, and that kind of sucked because especially in New York City, that's like you're making like crumbs. But it was something that kind of got me through like the first month of like just what an engineering team is like. So when I joined the agency, I kind of had like my feet wet already, and I was able to kind of get into like the speed of things, right? So definitely don't like try to always think about that immediate moment. Just think about what these little sacrifices can do to get you to that eventual goal.
Yeah, planting seeds, I like to think of it as. You never know which ones are going to grow. Michael LaRocca, who helpfully shared our stream on his Twitter earlier, is asking, do you have any tips for building your online presence, just like you did, Tech Rally?
Yeah, I think one thing I would recommend not to do is starting a YouTube channel, honestly, like especially if you're new to software development, because there's just way too much to learn. And as you probably already know, like editing and creating thumbnails and all of this stuff takes a lot of time. Like I started my YouTube channel when I was an experienced developer, and there was like this little bit of a kind of dullness in my coding journey where it's like I didn't want to learn anything new again for a while. But at the same time, I was pretty good at what I was doing. And YouTube is just like such a long game. Like I've had my YouTube channel for about 1.5 years, 2 years almost now. Probably 2 years, and I have 3,000 subs, and it's like very small compared to like some other bigger YouTube channels, right? So if anything, I would recommend more focusing on like the Twitter, the blogging aspect of creating your online presence. And now that Twitter spaces are getting pretty big, I would try to participate in those because those are more organic. So definitely I see actually Michael always like giving me a shout out, and I recognize him, and that's super good to know because, you know, like I am following his journey as well. So I would more lean towards that side because, yeah, like I said, the YouTube game is very difficult and the ROI is not quite there. Like, are there people that have gotten jobs because of their YouTube channel? Yes, but that's like one out of like, I don't even know, a lot.
Twitter Spaces are nice, actually.
Yeah, I would say it's a very organic way to meet, for experienced developers to meet new developers to meet other new developers, like 6-month developers to meet 6-month developers. It's so organic. I love it. Yeah.
So come actually tomorrow we're having one over on the Scrimba Twitter.
Yeah, I'll be listening in.
Brilliant. Looking forward to that.
I love your guys' Twitter space. It's always just so exciting, and Alex and you are just great hosts. So it's very easy to listen
to hear your thoughts as well. So if you want to say anything, just raise that hand.
Yeah, I always feel like I always request to speak. So I this time I just want to listen. Please don't let me up.
You're more than welcome if you want to. Yeah. Ansoup is asking, how much can Twitter help you out to get a job? In my experience, quite a lot. I got my job through Twitter. So.
Yeah, can you understand your experience how you got that? Because I always hear about stories, but I never heard like a very specific one.
Yeah, well, it's actually my husband Michael is in the chat. He reached out to our CEO for a kind of freelancing task that he wanted done, but then it ended up being way bigger than Michael could handle. So he said, "Oh, well, my wife can do some of it," and yeah, then I've just stuck around, and here I am.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah. So this is what I mean about planting seeds that you don't know which are going to grow.
Yeah, 100%.
And any opportunity comes your way. I mean,
yeah, you got to take the opportunities that are there, and like the whole planting the seed. I like that. I might steal that from you, but planting the seed is super important in terms of just like building the relationships, but not just building relationships, but building the relationships and then showing your skill sets, right? That is the second part that I think a lot of people don't talk about. Is like, you're a cool person, but can you at least show me a little bit that you can code? That way I could refer you, right? Otherwise, you're putting that person in a very difficult position to try to refer you if they don't really know if you can code or not.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah. So show off your skills.
Exactly.
Elias is asking, are certificates necessary on a portfolio? Are there any famous and globally trusted certification websites or organizations? What do you reckon of this?
I'm not a huge fan of certificates, to be honest, but there are some well-recognized like certifications like AWS, and it's not because I work at Amazon, but like I've heard a lot of great things about like people putting those types of certificates on. But it's not going to get you a job, like as in a sense, like you're still going to go through the interview process and all of those things. If anything, having those certificates and stuff can be like supplemental for you to get those interviews, right? So if you are able to get some certificates that will help you stand out, go for it, but don't expect it to be like your like golden ticket to like get your job 100%. And in terms of like famous and globally trusted, like I'm not too familiar with it because I actually don't have any certificates myself. So I might be the wrong person to ask about this, but I've heard other people on Twitter Spaces talk about like it's really good to have, especially if you don't have like some traditional form of education. So this could kind of be that education aspect of it. So I don't want to ever discount it, but you kind of have to, like I said, again, like the priority ladder, like what's the most important thing. So
that is interesting, actually, because a couple of questions coming in. Santiago is asking, do companies care about your no programming background? For example, Santiago's got a degree in music. And Lucky B, is education a vital part of your resume? Asking because as a school dropout, literally has no educational status. So what would you say to these people?
It is, and it isn't, right? It really depends on how you like paint your picture of yourself, right? And this is where like the resume and the portfolio are going to be really important, especially, and your LinkedIn. And it's kind of the same concept of don't shoot yourself in the foot during the interviews. Like don't shoot yourself in the way you present yourself online and your resumes. So in a sense, like try to highlight your projects, try to highlight your portfolio, try to highlight all those skill sets above anything beyond the education aspect if you're in this like category, right? So even in my portfolio course, like I put my resume above my projects, and I put my resume and skills above my projects because I have a degree. But I also recommend, if you don't have like a degree or formal education, switch it up, put your projects above your education or your skill sets, or don't even include it, right? Because you want the person looking at your portfolio or your projects or your LinkedIn to just focus on your highlights. Like no one ever makes like a low light reel of themselves. You're making highlight reels of yourself, right? Unless you're just trying to bash the other person. You want to do the same thing here. It's like try to kind of funnel them into what you're good at and not necessarily just be like, oh, I don't have this, right? So it's not going to be easy, don't get me wrong, but we try our best to focus on the things that we can versus like not highlighting all the bad things that we can't, not bad things, but like highlighting the things that we don't have, right? So that would be my recommendation.
That is excellent advice. And I think for people that are new to tech or maybe a bit nervous in an interview or whatever, it can be very easy to shoot yourself in the foot. So don't do that. Practice avoiding that, I would say. Lovely advice. Well, our hour is already up, but here, that was extremely fun. Here is the link to Tech Rally's new course about building your portfolio easily. Keyword easily there with HTML, CSS, and themes. So you can go and check it out. It looks super cool. Well, thank you very much for coming, Tech Rally. It has been fabulous, as I expected. And thank you, everyone.
Can I do one more plug, actually?
Wonderful questions. Yeah, go for it. Is it this link?
I'm actually working with Mike Chen that you know from Twitter. And we've been kind of working together on this website or application called Frontend Eval. And it's basically a platform for you to practice front-end exercises, and all the questions are free. Some of the solutions are locked up, but this is like literally what I wanted to build this year, and it just happened that I met the person that's kind of working on this. So if you are looking for front-end questions to practice with, definitely check this website out. It's so useful. And I kept talking about like widgets or stuff like that. And this is kind of the example that I was thinking of, like, oh, like how do you build a modal overlay in 45 minutes? Like how do you build like a multi-step form in like 60 minutes? So this is definitely something that I'm a huge, first of all, fan of. And now I get to start building on it and like make like tutorials on it as well. So if any of y'all, like I said, again, like I'm not a course creator. I just build stuff that I think would be useful. And this is definitely one of those things that I think would be useful for a lot of front end people that want to like break into tech. So highly recommend this as well.
Yeah, I'm glad you've mentioned this actually, because another type of live stream we have over on Scrimba's YouTube channel is our Friday live coding. And our next,
awesome.
Yeah, me and Michael, we're doing rock, paper, and scissors this Friday. But I have in the pipeline to actually have a go at some of these. So yes, multi-step form is in our pipeline. So we're going to be trying that out, and we will re-plug your site there, Tech Rally. So.
Appreciate it. Yeah, I gotta give a huge shout out to Mike first of all, because he's the one that started this. But hopefully, we could continue this platform and help people out as much as possible. So
yeah, looks awesome. I'm very excited to try it out. Yes, well, thanks very much for coming, Tech Rally, and hope you enjoy listening to our Twitter space tomorrow. And do feel free to raise your hand if you so wish.
Thank you so much, Leanne. I really appreciate you having me on.
Anytime. Yes, thanks very much. Catch you later.
Bye.